the best brands have a simple proposition that's ownable, and they're really consistent with that proposition. And when you're consistent, the customer knows what to expect, and they want you to stand for that thing over time. And that's how you really, build brand love.
Yeah, it's so true. And I'm very happy to have you use the word consistent, because, and it's why I started the conversation by saying, I would guess that this is a multi-year process, right? Because consistency and multi-year process are not the language of the online world today, are they?
No, they're definitely not.
All right, welcome back. This is the Unstoppable Entrepreneur Show. I'm Kelly Roach, and I have with me the amazing Jason Harris. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So excited to have you here. And we were having some great free session chat, and I was like, no, we got to stop talking. I want to get the recording done. But that's awesome. We have a lot to talk about. I think, the work that you're doing, and obviously I'll have you share all about, your work, your company, everything. But
sure.
The work that you're doing with reframing persuasion is so powerful and so important, because I think just like sales, persuasion kind of got a bad rap. And the way that you teach it is all about really uncovering the best elements of humanity, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's the title for the book. The tension is really in persuasion, and then putting soulful in that title. And that sort of leads my whole philosophy, which is that persuasion, whether we like it or not, because it is a bit of a mixed bag word, we're persuading every moment of every day, right? Yes. We're persuading, you're persuading guests to come on your show. You're persuading your husband to go on the vacation you want, or to move to a different part of the country. You're persuading your boss to give you a promotion, or if for a lot of your listeners, they're persuading their team to follow their lead and rally behind the direction of the company. And so all these sort of moments, both macro and micro persuasion, it's really what happens in the business world and in your personal life. And so realizing that and trying to take the power or the dirtiness, the grittiness of persuasion, which is often looked at as sort of fooling or tricking or trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes, and looking at it as admitting, okay, we're persuasive creatures. This is how we operate. How do we do that in the best, most authentic and truthful way? And that was really the sort of thesis for the concept of the book.
I love it. It's so powerful, and it's so important. And I know you talk about these 11 habits, and I want to get into that in just a second. But I think for everyone listening, a lot of times as leaders, our job is to persuade people to do the things that are in their own best interest that they wouldn't have done otherwise, right? And so that's the thing that's so powerful about what you're saying is, as leaders, we are influencers. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about leading at home, right, with our family, leading in the office with our team, leading in the market when we're communicating with the people that we want to transition into becoming our best customers. Whatever it is, it's all leadership, and leadership relies so heavily on persuasion. And so I love that you're reframing people's perception of that and helping them to better understand what it really is.
Yeah, that's right. And to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to be a successful leader. Yes. There's no way around that. You can't be sort of to be an unstoppable entrepreneur. Yes. You need to get people both internally and externally to follow you.
It's so true. Yeah. It's so true. So I want to dig into the 11 habits and some of what you are highlighting in the book for sure. But I want to first give people a little bit of a broader understanding of the scale of your success, what you're doing with the agency, a little bit of your entrepreneurial background. So can you just kind of give everybody the 30-second,
who I am, my story. Yeah. So I run an independent creative advertising agency. We're about 200 people. We have offices, when offices mattered, in New York, San Francisco, Seattle, and Chicago. And we work on, we develop and lead brand stories. So Peloton, for example, is a client that we started with 5 years ago before it was,
Before it was Peloton?
Before it was Peloton, and
yeah.
just came out as the second most relevant brand behind Apple. When they came to us and we started working with them, it was, who's going to buy a $3,000 bike? Is that going to work? And really figuring out through storytelling how to build that brand into what the brand's become. We work with a great brand like Ben & Jerry's that champions social causes. We work on Charles Schwab, Alaska Airlines, Jose Cuervo. We have about 30 brands. Typically, we work on, big blue chip brands that people would have heard of. And we tend to work with brands that are either nascent and need to be famous fast. So we have to persuade customers to buy a Peloton. Or when we started working with Method cleaning products, they were only sold at Target and no one had heard of them. Or we work with big brands like a Jose Cuervo that is looking to become more relevant, and they're established, but they need an injection of relevancy. So those are the two types of brands we typically work with, and our relationships with them are fairly long. I got into advertising, I'm like 22 years in now. When I was a kid, I knew I wanted to go into advertising. So I was a bit of an anomaly in that regard. And so I knew I had that entrepreneurial DNA like everyone in your audience. And so I knew I was going to start something at some point, but because I knew the career path I wanted to go on in my journey, I worked at a lot of different places to learn good leadership skills and bad leadership skills, so I could get that under my belt to start something. So that's the synopsis of my journey. And then I did the book. It took me about 3 years to write the book, and I realized, we talked about persuasion, that the way I was building my network and my business and the way I looked at entrepreneurship was different than a lot of the business books I was reading, which seemed to be transactional and about selling techniques or shortcuts or quick fixes. And I realized, well, that's not really how I feel like the best way to do it is. So I felt like I had something to say. So that was the idea behind the book.
That's incredible. And I love that. So I can only imagine that when you're taking one of these brands through this process, it's a multi-year journey, right? But can you share what some of the phases are that you take people through when they come to you and they say, okay, we want to become a household name, we're at the $100 million mark. We want to go to the $1 billion mark, or whatever that looks like. But, can you share some of the steps of kind of what that looks like?
Sure. So we have a pretty rich strategy department, and it always starts with insights and research. And so we always will find out, the awareness level of the brand, where the brand sits, whether they're well-known or not well-known.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the impetus of looking at the marketplace, looking at the competitors, looking at the category, looking at what the core of that company is, what makes that brand tick, doing research. Then we step away and we come up with some thesis or strategic hypothesis. We then test those, see what rises to the top and what will resonate, bring that back to the client, sort of have a direction in mind. Then we do creative ideation off of that process. And then, from there, we hopefully land on something that we can stick with for many years. And sometimes the marketplace changes and you have to pivot. Right. But the best brands have a simple proposition that's ownable, and they're really consistent with that proposition. And when you're consistent, the customer knows what to expect, and they want you to stand for that thing over time. And that's how you really, build brand love.
Yeah, it's so true. And I'm very happy to have you use the word consistent, because, and it's why I started the conversation by saying, I would guess that this is a multi-year process, right? Because consistency and multi-year process are not the language of the online world today, are they?
No, they're definitely not. And it's true. And we'll often, chief marketing officers, I think their life expectancy at a company is under 3 years. So it's 2 years and some change. And so when a new CMO comes in, and for your your small business entrepreneurs, when they get sort of maybe their second in command that comes in at the company, they immediately want to change everything. They immediately want to put their stamp on it. And that's often very dangerous. That's often very, very dangerous because you want to unearth what's working and maybe expand the story, but you don't want to change the story. And brands that do that, they're always changing their story every 2.5 years. They're very hard to follow, and they're very hard to build a community out of.
Yeah, I see that for sure. When you think about helping a brand to convey its story to the market and then make the market be a part of that story, what are some of the things that you think about? Like when you think about some of the brands that have had the most success working with your agency, like tell me a little bit about that story creation, that story communication. What does that look like?
Yeah, well, it usually has a few different parts to it, but it certainly has, there's usually a heritage component of the company, the origin story, why it exists. It could be founder-led. It could be that there was a need for the product in the marketplace. It could be there was a way to do something better. But it always has sort of an origin story that's there. And then you look at a few other parts. What is the purpose of the brand beyond that story? Yeah. Why does it exist in the world? What is it doing to make the world a better place? And that can be a byproduct of how they make the product. It can be some purpose-driven initiative that they feel is right for them because of the audience or the community. But it usually has those parts, like that origin story, and then this other purpose-driven part that's making the world better in some way. And that it's usually sort of combining those two storylines.
Yeah.
And then as you storytell over time, you don't have to change your story. You have to think of fresh ways to tell it.
Yes. I love that. I love that. Yeah. And especially now, I think more than ever, people want to buy from brands that they feel represent their values or how they perceive themselves in the world, or causes that they think are important, or decisions that they think are in alignment with who they believe themselves to be. And so having that origin story and having that purpose behind what you're doing is part of what people, I feel like, are evaluating when they're deciding who they do business with.
Yeah, you're totally right. There is a study that recently came out from the 4A's, which is the governing advertising federation, basically. And it said they interviewed thousands of consumers, and the study showed that 96% of consumers hate advertising. They don't like advertising. You can think about yourself as a consumer, and if you sit down to watch ads, or when you're trying to watch a video online, the thing that pops up, you're not into it, right? But conversely, 90% of consumers love brands. And so you can build, if you don't think about it as advertising your product or service, but you think about it as building a great brand, that's sort of a mental shift that can really help with storytelling in ways that don't feel like advertising, because it's more than benefits and pricing. It has to be a bigger thing that you're going to, because the consumer loves a great brand and a great story, even if they hate advertising.
Yes, so true. So true. So when your agency is looking with people, and then I want to make sure we have time to talk about the book as well. I have one more question about the agency before we move on. When you are working with these businesses, are you guys working with them across all channels? Like you're hitting their audience all different platforms, all different ways, all different type of advertising? Do you have a couple tenets that your agency is really focused on that you do with everyone? Like, tell me a little bit about your approach from that standpoint, and kind of what you see as being the major focal points for advertising in 2021.
Yeah, that's great. So, we have, we can do completely full service, everything on every platform, buy the media, sell the media, make an ad, produce an ad, put the ad out there, manage the social channels. We can really do everything from soup to nuts. We have a performance group that does measurement and analytics of the work we put out there. That said, we work with brands in 1, 2, or 3 or part of those functions. But what our specialty is really that strategic rigor up front, and then defining what the brand's going to be when it grows up, or if it's grown up, what it's going to become. And that's the value we really bring. That's the real magic. And I think when you think of the future in 2021 of brands, that is one piece that is going. It's evergreen. You need to have that no matter if you're on Clubhouse or Snapchat or TikTok or wherever your brand might find itself. That piece is the most important piece.
Yes.
And the rest are sort of channels and outlets to tell your story. But I think brands and storytelling in 2021, with the proliferation of so many platforms, it's important to really think about community. And community to me, story and community, if you have those two, everything else will fall into place. And building community can be done on multiple channels in multiple ways, but you have to really build the community first, and then continue to have a dialogue with that community and put the community first. So that sort of transcends. How 2021 might change. I think.
Yeah, no, I love it. I agree. And getting that community to pass your story on, right? Because that's the big thing, is like none of us can do it alone, and advertising helps. But then if you have raving fans that take your story and help you to do that, it makes life a lot easier.
I think, Kelly, that's such a good insight. I call that's to me is involvement marketing. And when you can come up with a story that other people can tell in their own words, that's when you have something really powerful, because then you've got your story down, you've built a community, and then you give your community tools to tell your story in their words. And that's when they're working double time for you. And I think especially in the small business world, that's critically important, because you're not going to have massive media dollars to flood the airwaves with your message. So you need to think about tools and ways to do involvement marketing where your community becomes your megaphone.
For sure. For sure. We could do a whole show just on that.
I know.
That, Jason. I would love to riff on that for a while with you, but I do want to make time for the book. So, okay. So you have this incredible book coming out. You're breaking down these 11 things. You're really helping people understand how the true and effective persuasion is really coming from the best parts of humanity, right? Which in many instances, people either use the bad parts or they misunderstand it. Yeah. So do you want to break down for our listeners, like maybe just a couple tidbits, and then obviously we'll tell them where they can get the full thing. But a couple tidbits of, kind of what you see.
Definitely. Yeah. So the book is based on, there's 11 habits, and the reason why I call them habits is because anyone can practice these, and after you practice them and you focus on them, they do become habitual. So there's not this notion that we were, born a certain way, and maybe somebody isn't a great storyteller, but that could be a learned skill. Or maybe somebody isn't an empathetic leader, but that could be a learned skill as well. And so habits is on purpose to make people realize that it can be practiced and learned. And so the book, before the 11 habits, there's 4 overriding principles. And the first is original, which is really all about being your true self. And, as a leader and an entrepreneur, like putting your idiosyncrasies out there and not trying to be something that you're not. And that's the main principle behind original. And then generous is this idea of being a naturally a person that naturally gives things away without expecting anything in return, and that can be connections, advice, time, resources. It doesn't have to be gifts, for example, but that's another principle. And then the third principle is empathetic, which is about creating a collaborative work environment, seeking out collaborations, making it about we versus me, like really having a team mentality, which, for example, that's something I had to learn as a core principle to get the most value out of my work and what I was doing. And then the fourth is soulful, which is adds that soulful into persuasion, which is really about as a leader and a business owner being inspirational and doing something beyond just looking for dollars and cents and profit. But what are you doing in your company that is that give back, that is doing something beyond yourself? And that by being an inspiration, you will be more influential and your company will be more successful. But you have to really figure out what that thing is and focus on it. So those are the guiding principles. And then I have habits underneath them. And maybe for the sake of time, I'll pull like one or two habits.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's awesome. Then we'll let him grab the book. I will be getting it as soon as we get off today. And
good.
Having all the team members read it.
I'll send you some copies. Don't worry about it. So one idea that I talk a lot about is never be closing, and I think that's really important for entrepreneurs. That's one of the habits that I talk about, and we're always trained with the ABCs of always be closing instead of never be closing. And when I was working in that way, I was finding that the relationships I was building for work were very transactional, and they were very binary. It was a yes or a no. And when you think of growing your business in a never be closing mindset, you're thinking of building a network and building relationships and building your future. And if someone you can't make a sale, and you spent all this time pitching that idea or that product or service and it didn't land, you've still invested in that relationship.
Yes.
So maintain that relationship and keep that relationship up, and that will demonstrate a lot about your personality and that you care about things beyond just that immediate gain. And so there's a lot of times I've pitched business and we haven't won, but I kept in touch with that person and I built a relationship. And years down the road, maybe they go to another company and we get that brand, we get that person because we've invested. So maintain those relationships. Don't have a transactional mindset. And when you have when you make that switch, magic things happen. So that's never be closing is one habit. This idea of it's not me, it's us is something I really had to learn, but that's another habit. And it's the ability to see things from other people's perspective and truly empathizing with where they're coming from and digging deeper to find out what's behind their point of view. It doesn't mean you're persuading them to agree with your point of view, but it's having the knowledge to understand where they're coming from. And I think that idea, and it's a form of empathy, really can build great leadership skills. And there's a lot of ways you can practice these habits that I have in the book, but that's just a few examples.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So good. I mean, the stuff you're talking about here, it's not only the stuff that makes for building a sound business that will actually be sustainable, but it's like being a good leader, being a good teammate, having people want to stay and work for you during, the long haul, building effective collaborations and partnerships, right? It's like, people think of building this golden Rolodex of people that, can do things for them, but really what you're saying is building a golden Rolodex of people that you can do things for. And over time, those relationships will materialize and grow in all different ways that you can't predict or expect, right? And
that's exactly right. Yeah, you can't imagine where that will take you, but having a mindset which is very counter to being an entrepreneur, but having a mindset of playing the long game and not trying to have everything be urgent and rushing everything, will serve you really well, because you will be collecting this network over time. And when you turn around in a few years, the size of your network and the power of your community, you can do magical things with. But if you're looking to quarter to quarter and only in the short term, you're going to look back in a few years and you may not have a lot. You might have some money, but you might not have a lot to build off of.
So true. Oh my gosh. And I'm so happy to hear you say long game. We talked about that on the show constantly. And I think every uber successful person that I've brought on this show, we have had that exact conversation.
Oh, wow.
It's not a single one of us that are like, yes, if we just focus on instant gratification, everything's
going to fall into place.
Yeah, exactly. Well, absolutely brilliant. So Jason, let's share with people where they can follow your brand and kind of see what you guys are doing online and all of that. And then obviously, where can we get a copy of the book, all that good stuff?
Yeah, sure. So the company is Mekanism.com. It's with a K, because when we started the company, the CH was taken, so we changed our name. So it's Mekanism. You can find out more about me and the book at the soulfulart.com. And, the book's available when bookstores were open. It was there. Some of them are open now, but of course it's on Amazon.
Perfect.
And anywhere books are sold.
Awesome. The soulfulart.com.
That's
so
right.
Guys, you can grab your copy of the book. It's going to be linked in the show notes down below. Jason, thank you so much for sharing your brilliance today. It was absolutely awesome having you on the show, and just great conversation. Thanks for everything you shared.
All right. Thank you so much, Kelly.
All right, guys, we'll see you back here next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Unstoppable Entrepreneur Show. My name is Kelly Roach. I help entrepreneurs around the world build, grow, and scale successful online businesses. If you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss an episode.